Lesson 2.8, we're going to talk about percents. This is a lesson that you guys want your calculator for, so if you don't have a calculator yet, please check one down so that the rest of the chapter is smooth sailing. So 2.8%, there's your date, and we'll get started. So first we're looking at taking different numbers and turning them into percents. Two ways to do this. If you have a decimal, you can take this first example, 0.27, and technically it gets multiplied by 100. If you take 0.27 times 100, you get 27, and that's our answer. There's a shortcut way to do this, and it just involves moving your decimal. Anytime you multiply by 100, the shortcut is to take your decimal and move it 2 spots to the right. That's the one I tend to do because I can just do it in my head or just show that I'm moving my decimal over 2 spots and get my answer. So over here we have 0.05. Just move that decimal over 2 spots to get it into a percent, and you have 5%. I forgot to label that first one. So percents all get that label with the percent symbol. 4.9, if you have 4.9 and you have to move this over 2 spots, well, we move it over 1 spot and we ran out of numbers. That's okay. Move it over 1 more spot and know that your decimal goes here, and you'll fill in with any zeros. So 4.9 is equal to 490%. 0 is 0% and 1 is 100%. So if you have any number that is bigger than 1, it's going to be over 100%. So when we had 4, which is bigger than 1, that's why we had such a big percentage, 490%. So it kind of makes sense when we think about it that way. All right, if you have fractions, I think the easiest way to go about getting this into a percent is to go through your decimal. So 1/2 is equal to 0.5. And if you're not sure what the decimal is, just take 1 divided by 2 on your calculator. And now that you have the decimal, move it over 2 spots and fill in a 0, and we get 50%. 7/10, divide that out, you get 0.7. Move your decimal 2 spots to give us 70%. Some of these you might already know. 1/2 is a common fraction. That's half or 50%. That's fine if you already know it. But if you're not sure, just divide it out. 3 divided by 4 is 0.75. And then just move your decimal over to give us 75%. All right, so now we're going the other way. Change each percent into a reduced fraction and into a decimal. So any percent that you have, to turn it into a fraction, you take the numbers. We're going to take 40, and we put it over 100. 40 over 100 is our fraction. We want to go ahead and reduce it. You can do the 0 trick on this. You can see 40 and 100 end in a 0, so you can cancel 1 0 with 1 0. Leaving you with 4 over 10. And then how does 4 over 10 reduce? Divide by 2 and you get 2 over 5. So there's your reduced fraction. And then to get a decimal, just divide it and you get 0.4. So again, percents into fractions, put it over 100 and just reduce. Here you can cancel out a 0 with a 0, leaving you with 28 over 10. And then reducing a 28 over 10, you can divide by 2 and you get 14 over 5. Another way to get from a percent to a decimal, if we don't have to give this fraction piece in the middle, is you can take any percent, so 280%, the decimal's at the end. You can move it 2 spots to the left, which gives us 2.80, and that is our decimal. So you can move the decimal the other way. 7.5%, I'll do the decimal one first. If you take your decimal, move it once, twice to the left, you get 0.075. So that is our decimal. Now the reduced fraction, 7.5%, you take your 7.5 and you put it over 100. Now, the problem with this fraction is that you have this decimal right here. You can't have a decimal within a fraction. So to fix that, we just say, well, let's move our decimal one spot over so we can work with 75 instead. It's kind of like we just multiplied it by 10 to give us, you know, a whole number versus that 7.5. Well, if you're going to do that on the top, you have to make sure that you do that on the bottom also and move that over one spot or multiply by 10. You're going to end up filling in a 0 down here. So you have 75 over 1,000. Now we can reduce this. I believe 25 goes into both numbers. 75 divided by 25 is 3. 1,000 divided by 25 is 40. And that's a reduced fraction. So look out for that one with the decimal. If you have a decimal within a fraction, it's totally fine. Just move the decimal as many spots as you need to the right. Just make sure you move the bottom decimal to the right as well. So if you have, we're talking decimals and percents. Decimal comes before percent in the alphabet. So if you're going from a decimal, if you have a decimal and you're turning it into a percent, you're going to move your decimal 2 spots to the right. See how I have to go from the left to the right to get a decimal into a percent? So this is a little trick a student showed me one time. If you have a percent over here on the right and you need a decimal, you move it 2 spots to the left. So if you ever get confused, that shortcut on moving your decimal, which way should I move it? You can draw out the D and the P and say, which one do I have? And then move it to the right or to the left to kind of match how that lines up alphabetically. Okay, so a lot of what you guys are going to do in this section is using the percent proportion. This is percent proportion right here. If you have a part over a whole, it's always going to be equal to the percent over 100. And I'm going to give you a shortcut way to do this. Instead of part over whole, maybe you've seen is over of is equal to percent over 100. So is over of equals percent over 100. We're going to look at the problem and figure out which number is the is value, which one is the of, which one is the percent, fill in what we have and solve for what we're missing. So this is the technical proportion. This is the shortcut proportion that we tend to use. All right, here's our last slide. These questions that use the percent proportion tend to look like this. It says 8 is what percent of 64? So if I keep in mind, I'm going to do is over of equals percent over 100. When I set this up, I always put the 100 in right away. I know that that's where that goes. And then I start figuring out the rest of the numbers. So it says 8 is. So 8 is tells me that 8 is the is value. So I'm going to put 8 in the top left where the is goes. If you keep reading, it says of 64. So that means your of value is 64. So 64 goes where the of is. And then the what is what we're trying to find, and it says what percent. So the x goes in the percent spot. And then all we're doing is cross multiplying and solving for x. This will be your simple proportions, simple cross multiplying. So 64 times x is 64x. 8 times 100 is 800. And then you just divide both sides by 64. And x equals, now because this problem deals with percentages, it's okay for us to have decimal answers. If we divide that out, we get 12.5. But the thing to look out for is any time that you're finding the percent, which happens to be this example, that's the one that gets a label. It's 12.5%. The only one that gets a label is your percent right here. So if that's what you're trying to find, make sure that goes on your answer. All right, last one. 14 is 28% of what number? So I set up my percent proportion. I know where 100 goes on the bottom right. And then I try to fill in everything else. If they give you the percent number, see how they gave us 28%? that's the percent that goes above the 100. So that one's set. It's easy to find because it will have the percent symbol, and there's only 1% in the entire problem, so that's where that one is. Now I'm looking for the is and the of. The is in the beginning. It says 14 is. So the is goes top left, so here's my 14. And I already know that I should have the x below it because that's the only thing left for us to solve for. But if I look at the problem, here's my of, and then it says what number, and the what number is the x. So we will just cross multiply and solve this one. 28 times x is 28x. 14 times 100 is 1400. Divide both sides by 28. And x equals 50. And I don't have to put the percent because they weren't asking for the percent. It's just 50. 14 is 28% of 50. So that's our answer.